Hello, my name is Richard Mogensen. I'm a professional wetland scientist, the Ecological Restoration Program Manager for the Centerra Corporation. Orange County contracted with Centerra in April 2020 to prepare an environmental assessment and suitability analysis, also known as an EA, for the Greene Tract. The EA document was prepared as a planning tool for Orange County, the town of Chapel Hill, the town of Carrboro, when evaluating preservation and development areas for the site. This webinar summarizes the findings of the EA report and includes several alternative concept plans for future development. The Greene Tract is 164 acres undeveloped land about 3 miles northwest of downtown Chapel Hill. It includes 60 acres owned by Orange County known as the Headwaters Preserve. The remaining 104 acres is jointly owned by Orange County, town of Chapel Hill, and the town of Carrboro. The two towns and the county have been gathering public input and discussing the best usage for this land for more than 25 years. In January 2020, they jointly adopted the Greene Tract resolution for a path forward to evaluate potential preservation and development options for the site. This map shows the different local jurisdictions around the Greene Tract. The Carolina blue areas, of course, are Chapel Hill town limits. The lighter blue-gray area is Chapel Hill's Extraterritorial Jurisdiction, or ETJ, which includes the Greene Tract. The dark green area to the southwest is Carrboro town limits, and the light green to the northwest and northeast are Orange County's rural buffer areas. Chapel Hill and Carrboro have expanded northward over the last 30 years, and much of the surrounding Greene Tract has been filling in with housing and commercial development. In April last year, Orange County selected our firm, Centerra, to conduct an environmental assessment of the site. Our scope of work, as laid out in the county's request for proposals, did not include determining how much land should be preserved or developed. The RFP indicated that 16 acres would be used for a public elementary school and recreational site, 66 acres for residential and commercial mixed-use development, including affordable housing, to serve a range of income levels. The remaining 82 acres would be preservation, which would include the 60-acre preservation plus 22 additional acres. The acreage for each land use are specified in the 2020 Greene Tract resolution adopted by the towns in the county, which you can find on the Orange County's website under the heading Greene Tract. There are also several other documents and meeting agendas on the county website that explain the history and planning behind those decisions. You'll also find a SurveyMonkey link for submitting your questions and comments. We'll review questions and comments along with the county and town staff and prepare a new or updated webinar to answer them as necessary. Centerra's scope of work, as specified in the RFP, was to evaluate the natural and cultural resources throughout the Greene Tract, identify the most important and sensitive areas for preservation, and to recommend the most appropriate areas for the different proposed land uses. Areas for development were determined by considering the existing and potential connections to surrounding roads and utilities, and should be compatible with current residential development. The scope of work also included mapping and describing streams, wetlands, riparian buffers along streams, plant community types, rare species habitats, large diameter trees, sensitive lands, steep slopes, rocky outcrops, and historic remains. The resulting maps are based on our field data from last spring, plus previous ecological and cultural resource studies on the Greene Tract from 20 years ago, as well as topography data and soils from Orange County. We submitted our stream and wetland mapping to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for verification. We met on site with the Corps agent Samantha Daly in September 2020 to field verify and adjust the stream and wetland boundaries. This month we received the approved JD from the Corps. Then we added the required riparian buffers based on the state's Jordan Lake protection rules and the county and town's buffer regulations. The local government buffer rules are wider and give more protection than the state's rules. The combined streams, wetlands, and buffer areas totaled roughly 40 acres. We then selected the best of the upland forest acres and added those to the buffer areas to reach a total of 82 acres for preservation. The upland preservation areas were chosen to provide travel corridors and connectivity for wildlife. The preservation areas connect the streams and wetlands on the north side of the property with those on the south side and with off-site habitats. We included areas that provide habitat for the four-toed salamander, a state-protected species on the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission's Special Concern list. The next step was to bring in our site development planners and engineers. Given the constraints on road and utility connections off-site, there are some places where roads and utilities need to cross the areas we recommended for preservation. Our ecologists and engineers had a lot of discussion with Orange County, Chapel Hill, and Carrboro staff about how best to get vehicles and utilities into the areas not identified for preservation. All areas designated for development will need to have roads and utility connections. Then we adjusted the preservation areas to accommodate development infrastructure where it was absolutely necessary. At this point, our senior ecologist, Gerald Pattern, the lead scientist who coordinated the field surveys and did the bulk of the mapping and EA preparation, will speak. After Gerald explains the ecological findings, our site planning engineer, Dan Warwick, BE, will discuss the site development alternatives.
I'm Gerald Pattern. I'm a fish and wildlife ecologist, and I've been working as an environmental consultant for the past 30 years. In addition to my role in this current study, I was also part of the team that did the first environmental surveys of the Greene Tract 20 years ago. Let's start with the topographic map from the county's GIS data. The red dashed lines are topographic ridges or watershed divides, and the blue areas are streams and wetlands in the valleys. Elevations on the site range from about 500 feet along the streams up to about 580 feet on the hill where the two ridges form a T. Each of those thin black lines is a 2-foot elevation contour. The two watershed divides separate 3 different stream basins: Oldfield Creek to the north, Bowling Creek to the south, and Booker Creek to the east. All of these streams eventually flow into the upper end of Jordan Lake. The uppermost reaches of streams and wetlands near a watershed divide are called headwaters. Nature preserves in headwaters are fairly rare because they're good places to build things and safe from flooding hazards. The green, yellow, and orange areas indicate ground surface slopes. Most of the site in green has slopes less than 10%, which are suitable for most types of development. The yellow areas have 10 to 20% slopes, and orange indicates slopes of 20 to 30%. We generally avoid developing the steep slope areas due to concerns over erosion and instability. It can be done with retaining walls and special structures, but it's better to avoid these areas if we can. Most of the steep slopes are close to streams, as are most of the rocky outcrops. Here's a 2019 aerial photo from Google Earth showing the major roads surrounding the Greene Tract and the potential access points. The Greene Tract is now the last remaining large undeveloped parcel in the vicinity. The site is almost entirely forested at present, except for some dirt roads, a power line, and gas line rights-of-way that are kept mowed. Access on the south side is from Merrin Road off Homestead Road. On the west side, there's Purefoy Drive and Lizzie Lane off Rogers Road. Merrin, Purefoy, and Lizzie are the only 3 access roads that currently extend up to the Greene Tract boundary. From the north, there's Jean Stew Drive off Eubanks Road, but Jean Stew ends on private property 800 feet north of the Greene Tract. Along the eastern edge is an active railroad line that runs from between Hillsborough and Durham down to the UNC campus. This line might eventually be retired when UNC stops using coal for generating power. But for now it is active, and the railroad company has informed Orange County that they don't want any new road crossings between Eubanks Road and Homestead Road. Here's the USDA soil survey map. 2 types of sandy loam soils, referred to as Appling and Helena, cover 93% of the site. Both soil types are USDA designated prime farmland soils. The remaining areas are small patches of soils mapped as Georgeville, Cecil, and Taurus soil series. All of these are naturally acidic soils with pH values from 4.5 to 6, and they're mostly well-drained to moderately well-drained. These soils are formed by weathering of granite, diorite, and quartzite rocks on the site. The majority of wetlands, which we'll get into in the next slide, are in the strip mapped as Helena, the HEB soil across the southern half of the site. Helena is not classified as a hydric soil series, but it does have slow permeability and often has small patches of hydric soils that USDA didn't map, which is what we found here. Hydric soil is saturated for extended periods, long enough that it becomes partially anaerobic. Hydric soil is one of the 3 main indicators for identifying wetlands. Here are the streams, wetlands, and buffers along Oldfield Creek on the northern part of the Greene Tract. The dark blue line on the left side is the perennial stream reach, turquoise is intermittent, and yellow is ephemeral. These categories are based on how much time a stream is flowing or not flowing. We use the State Division of Water Resources stream classification method to make these determinations and compared our results with data collected by Chapel Hill Stormwater Division a few years earlier. The uppermost reach on the right side was channelized long ago, probably in the 1930s or earlier, so it was difficult to tell whether it had originally been a stream, a wetland, or neither one. The purple lines are wetland boundaries. We followed the Army Corps of Engineers Wetland Manual for the Piedmont region, which relies on hydric soils, wetland plants, and hydrology indicators. The areas mapped along the two ephemeral segments, the yellow lines extending southward, had rather weak wetland indicators. We had a hunch the Corps might decide those segments were not wetlands, and when we met the Corps agent on site in September, these areas were dry, and she did exclude them. However, even the ephemeral segments help protect the downstream wetlands and stream segments by modulating flow, temperature, and water quality. Therefore, the county and the towns decided we should keep the mapping as is and include the ephemeral segments in the preservation areas. The pale green lines surrounding the streams and wetlands are the riparian buffers. The Jordan Lake Buffer Rule protects 50 feet along each side of perennial and intermittent streams, but none along ephemeral streams or along wetlands. Orange County and the towns have protection rules that go beyond the state's rules. For each type of feature, we applied the buffer width from whichever local government had the most protective requirements. For perennial streams, we used 150-foot buffers. For intermittent streams, we used 80-foot buffers. For ephemeral streams, we used 15-foot. And for wetlands, we used 80-foot. Here's a similar map for the Bowling Creek watershed on the southern part of the Greene Tract. These streams were not channelized as extensively as the upper reach of Oldfield Creek. The headwater wetlands transition directly into intermittent streams, with no ephemeral stream reaches. The northeastern branch, with the isolated wetland at the upper end, is one of the important areas for the salamanders. The lower segments of both Bowling Creek and Oldfield Creek, with perennial flow, also contain a few species of fish, but they're probably too small to support any protected species of river mussels. And here's the map for the Booker Creek watershed on the east side of the Greene Tract. This area has only wetlands on the west side of the railroad, no stream. The stream begins east of the railroad at the drainage culvert outlet. The small wetland at the top right, labeled Wetland H1, is in a mowed power line right-of-way with no trees and has very limited wildlife habitat value, so we didn't apply a buffer around that one. The two larger wetlands to the south were almost dry by early May, so they're probably not ideal for salamander breeding sites. The streams, wetlands, and appropriate buffers total about 40 acres. Next, we need to select which additional uplands are the most important to preserve. This map shows the forest community types and approximate ages. We compiled this using Google Earth aerial photos, historic aerials from the pre-Google era back to 1938, and lots of field notes. The dark green areas are dominated by loblolly pine, which is native in river floodplains but was probably not present on the Greene Tract until the 1900s. The current pine-dominated areas are mostly abandoned farmland. The gray-brown areas have mostly hardwood trees like oaks, hickory, maple, tulip tree, sweet gum, persimmon, sourwood, and musselwood, with scattered shortleaf pine and Virginia pine, which would have been the original native pine species on this site. The hardwood forests were probably used for timber and firewood, but they don't appear to have been farmed, and they support a wider variety of native trees and plant species. The stream and wetland corridors in blue and yellow support the highest plant diversity. The blue areas remain fairly wet with ponded water until June in an average year. This is important for four-toed salamanders because the larvae are gill breathers from the time they hatch in March or April until they lose their gills and become terrestrial air breathers in June or July. If the wetlands dry up too early, the larvae die. All of the four-toed salamander nests known so far on the Greene Tract are in the blue areas. The yellow areas are streams and wetlands that probably dry up too early for salamander larvae to complete their metamorphosis. But these areas are still important for helping to maintain flow into the downstream reaches. We estimated the age of each forest stand based on trunk diameter of the canopy trees and from the historic aerial photos. Forest stand ages are shown in red just below the pine and hardwood labels. We also mapped the locations of individual large trees that the county and towns consider significant or specimen trees. We found 3 historic aerial photos in the UNC Library database from 1938, 1955, and 1975. Here's the 1955 photo. The light gray areas were still being farmed at that time. The medium gray indicates hardwood forests, and the darkest areas are planted loblolly pines, probably on former farmland. The yellow squares are homes or farm buildings. The southern one was already abandoned at this time, but the ones in the middle were probably still in use. By 1975, all the buildings were abandoned and all the farmland was covered in young forest. An archaeological study of the site in 2000 located the remains of these homesteads. The cluster in the field near the center of the site is the Bird Homestead, and the one in the woods farther south is the Potts House. We found the Potts House remains last year. It's basically a stone chimney with remnants of a foundation. It still looked pretty similar to the way it looked 20 years ago. The Bird Homestead is now buried in a massive thicket of Chinese wisteria vines, and we didn't get to see those structures last year. We also evaluated the Greene Tract for federally protected and state-protected endangered and threatened species. This table lists most of the 45 protected species reported in Orange County according to the Natural Heritage Program database. There's a second page with another 15 species in our EA report. If you look at the 4th and 5th columns in this table, the state list includes a lot more species than the federal list does. But the state endangered and threatened species laws don't have the teeth that the federal Endangered Species Act does. The state law regulates collecting and selling listed species, but it doesn't regulate habitat destruction due to land development. It's up to the landowners, developers, and local governments as to whether they choose to protect state-listed species in their habitats. Many of the species on this list occur only in northern Orange County in the Neuse River Basin, or in specialized habitats such as diabase glades and high pH soils that don't occur on the Greene Tract. We determined that none of the federally protected species is likely to occur on the Greene Tract. Among the state-protected species, the four-toed salamander is the only one actually documented on site. 6 species of protected river mussels live in New Hope Creek, just below its confluence with Oldfield Creek, 2 miles northeast of the Greene Tract. We also found areas on site that might be marginally suitable for a few of the listed plant species, but we didn't find those actual plants. Some species have limited seasons for finding them, so it would take multiple survey trips during different seasons to do a thorough search for all of them. We developed 3 preservation plan alternatives, considering the streams, wetlands, riparian buffers, protected species, forest quality, and wildlife habitat connectivity. The differences between them are fairly minor, and they all track fairly closely with the conceptual plans that the county and towns developed over the past several years, and with the landscape plan for wildlife habitat connectivity that the Eno New Hope Landscape Conservation Group completed in 2019. Here's the first one. The very pale blue lines are the suggested preservation boundaries, totaling 82 acres. It includes all of the streams, wetlands, and buffers, and most of the older and more diverse forest stands. The yellow-brown lines are existing old dirt roads, and the green squares are large specimen trees. There are a lot more large trees inside the riparian buffers, but we didn't map all of those because we knew they'd be in the protected area anyway, so we focused on mapping large trees outside of the buffers. The areas proposed for development, shaded in blue, include the southern area, which might be used for the school and recreation area, and the west central and northeast areas for residential and mixed use. We'll need 2 road segments through the preservation areas to connect the 3 development areas, but these will be designed to be narrow and have minimal impact on the adjacent forests, and will follow the old dirt roads where possible. The second alternative takes away some preservation land from the Oldfield Creek Basin and adds it to the Bowling Creek Basin. This one doesn't capture quite as much of the mature hardwood forest in the north central area, but it provides more protection for the Bowling Creek wetlands and it makes the job of designing a gravity sewer system to serve the development areas a bit easier, as Dan will explain later. The third alternative came out of one of our progress meetings with the county and towns. They're looking into acquiring 2 adjacent parcels along Merrin Road at the southeast corner of the Greene Tract, just east of the proposed school site. If that option pans out, that would allow us to preserve more of the hardwood forest between the Bowlin Creek and the Booker Creek basins. This map shows the Greene Tract in relation to nearby parks, natural areas, and other green space, including lands owned or managed by Duke Forest, Orange County, Orange Water and Sewer Authority, UNC, Triangle Land Conservancy, and the towns of Carrboro and Chapel Hill. These are areas likely to remain mostly or partly undeveloped except for recreational facilities. You can see how the Greene Tract is strategically located to be used as a stopover refuge for birds and wildlife moving between the natural areas to the north and those to the south. This one shows local greenway trails for walking and bicycling. Presently, there are limited trails adjacent to the Greene Tract, but the county and towns are planning for more connectivity between off-site trails and the Greene Tract. The mountain biking trails currently on the site are not shown. That's all for our ecological summary. There's more detail on all of these topics in the EA report, which is linked on Orange County's website, Town of Chapel Hill's website, and Town of Carrboro's website. There's also an error I need to point out. The EA states that a road connection to the east might be possible in the future if the railroad is retired. More likely, the railroad will be converted to commuter rail, and it may be feasible to install a bicycle and pedestrian trail crossing, but it won't be a road crossing for motor vehicles. Now I'd like to introduce our engineer, Dan Warwick, to talk about the site development plans.
My name is Dan Warwick. I'm a professional engineer and market leader for Centera Corporation. Last year, our team coordinated with Orange County to develop and prepare 4 roadway alternatives for the Greene Tract. The primary focus of those alternatives were to minimize developmental impacts to proposed preservation and buffer areas, maximize developable areas for mixed-use markets including residential, commercial, and institutional, provide ingress and egress throughout the tract to incentivize prospective developers, allow but minimize the water and sewer infrastructure routing throughout the site and along the proposed roadways for potential developments. Road Alternative 1 is shown in layouts A and B. Both layouts A and B include the following: 4 off-site road connections along the northern and southern and western portions of the site. The road layouts for this alternative equate to approximately 7,300 linear feet of pavement. The utility layouts are based on existing external roadways and existing 2018 LiDAR topography. Public right-of-ways and utility easements will be required for road connections and utilities that cross through adjacent private properties. There is some limited developable acreage within and across the Duke Energy right-of-way, which may be developed for parking, access roads, and some mixed-use development on the other side of the right-of-way. Alternate 1, Layout A, proposes to maximize developable acreage along the western and center portion of the site for mixed-use development, and the southern portion of the site for a potential 16-acre school site. The proposed utility infrastructure route appears to affect less preservation area than Alternate 1, Layout B. Alternate 1, Layout B proposes to maximize developable acreage along the center portion of the site for mixed-use development, and again the southern portion for a 16-acre school site. The pros for Alternate 1 is that it maximizes developable area for each portion of the site depending on preservation area, and it requires less pavement, earthwork, and impact on preservation areas. The cons for this alternate are the public right-of-ways and utility easements will be required for road connections and utilities that cross through adjacent private properties. Future road connection to Northwestern Unnamed Road and Northern Genestow Drive will require additional pavement and utility extension. Road Alternate 2 is shown in layouts C and D. Both layouts C and D include the following: 4 off-site road connections along all portions of the site, which include a potential greenway crossing over the existing railroad. This roadway layout equates to approximately 8,000 linear feet of pavement, which is slightly more than Alternate 1 options. This alternate proposes the same utility infrastructure layout. Public right-of-ways and utility easements will be required for road connections and utilities that cross through adjacent private properties. Again, there is some limited developable acreage within and across the Duke Energy right-of-way, which may be developed for parking, access roads, and some residential or mixed-use development on the other side of the right-of-way. Alternate 2, Layout C, proposes to maximize developable acreage along the western portion of the site for mixed-use development and the southern portion for a 16-acre school site. Additionally, the proposed sewer infrastructure route appears to affect less preservation area than Layout D. Alternate 2, Layout D, proposes to maximize developable acreage along the center portion of the site for mixed-use development, as well as the school site on the southern portion of the site. This layout does propose more impact to preservation areas. The pros for alternate 2 is that it maximizes developable area of each portion of the site depending on the preservation area. It offers ingress and egress for all portions of the site. The cons for alternate 2 is that public right-of-ways and utility easements will be required for road connections and utilities that cross through adjacent private properties. And future road connection to current unnamed Northwestern Road and North Genestoe Drive will require additional pavement and utility extensions. Overall, development on these sites will most likely cause some ecological effects in the preservation areas, but planning and civil engineering stormwater design for proposed developments can be done in an attempt to minimize these effects. The county and towns can work with developers and their design team to minimize ecological impacts, to protect the specimen trees, as well as the birdhouse historic remains that are outside of the preservation areas. It should be noted that the Potts House site is already within the planned preservation area. We'd like to thank Orange County, the town of Chapel Hill, and the town of Carrboro for this opportunity to share our expertise in site evaluation and planning on the Greene Tract. We welcome your questions and comments, which can be submitted on any of the 3 local government websites under the Greene Tract links. Thank you.